Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Have you ever done something and then afterwards asked yourself, why the heck did I do that? It can be as if we have an angel and a devil on our shoulders giving us good advice and bad. What if we actually thought of ourselves as having several different parts within us rather than just the two? Some of those parts we like and some we don't. For those that we don't, it can be like a nasty game of whack-a-mole with yourself to try to pat down those parts and even suppress them. If you can relate, then welcome to the human race. We all do it, and we all have various parts within us. Parts we like, and parts we don't. The important thing is to get to know these parts, to get curious, and not just pretend they aren't there by keeping them out of sight and out of mind. Wait, how do I get to know these parts within me? And exactly why is that important? Thankfully, we have just the man to answer these questions and to describe the therapy he has created around that idea. Dr. Richard Schwartz goes by the name Dick and is the father of a form of psychotherapy called internal family systems, which is also known as IFS. IFS provides methods for us to know our parts and be more in control of our lives. IFS has gained international recognition for its effectiveness with a host of mental health conditions, including, just to name a few, PTSD, depression, anxiety, phobias, and substance abuse. It's even been shown as effective with various physical conditions, including rheumatoid arthritis. Dick is a luminary in psychology and easily one of the best-known people in the entire field today. He explains how IFS can help us know our parts and why that is such a crucial thing for us all. So listen in as Dick and I have a lively exchange about knowing the parts that make you, you. Dr. Richard Schwartz, who has asked me to call him Dick, welcome to Super Psyched.
Thanks so much, Adam. It's great to be with you.
Glad. So obviously the first question is, what is internal family systems, also known as IFS?
Well, it started out as a form of psychotherapy that takes the position that the mind is naturally multiple, that it's actually good to have these inner subpersonalities that I call parts because we're born with them and they're all valuable. Although they are often forced out of their naturally valuable states into roles that can be damaging but often were necessary when you had a trauma when you were young or when you had bad parenting. And unfortunately, they get frozen in those times and frozen in the more extreme states. So one big tenet of IFS is that everybody is a multiple personality in that sense. Everybody has parts, and it's not the product of pathology. It's actually a good thing because they're all valuable. And that, as I say, they get forced out of their naturally valuable states into roles that can be damaging and are anachronistic. They might have been necessary when you were a kid, but they aren't anymore. And so that's one basic premise of the model. And then this even harder to believe premise, because the first one implies that there aren't any bad ones, that even heinous parts, if you get to know them and learn their secret histories, will reveal how they had to protect you at some point in your life. They can transform. So it's a very hopeful approach. It says even people who seem hopeless aren't, that all this can change. And then even more hopefully, I learned by trying to get parts to work with each other and get people to work differently with their parts, after I learned they weren't what they seemed. And I would try to have dialogues, because I'm a family therapist by background. So I would try to have a person, say, talk to their inner critic in a way that would allow the inner critic to feel safe enough to reveal its secret history, its vulnerability. And while I'm doing that, my client is really angry at the inner critic. And in family therapy, we learned when you're trying to have a dialogue with two people and suddenly one of them is angry, if you look around, you might find somebody's covertly siding with that person against the other. And we learned to get that person, the third person, to step out of the line of vision so that they can have an uninterrupted dialogue. And what you'd find is that, yeah, things would settle down and they would get along. They would start to talk in a different way. And I started thinking maybe the same thing's happening in this inner system. Maybe as my client's trying to talk to their critic, a part who hates the critic has jumped in. So I would ask clients, could you get that one to step back until the dialogue's over? And when they would say, okay, it did, they would shift. And often suddenly shift into a state in which they could have this dialogue with the critic in a way that was very healing. Because they would, where they hated it seconds earlier or were terrified of it, you get that to step back and suddenly they're curious about it, or they're interested in it, or they want to help it actually and feel compassion for it. And in that state, the critic would respond in a good way and we could work out these transformations. And when I started asking clients, now what part of you is that? They'd say, that's not a part like these others. That's myself, or that's me, or my core. So I came to call that the self with a capital S. And the hardest thing for people to believe about IFS, and the biggest, I think, discovery, for lack of a better word, is that self with a capital S is in everybody and can't be damaged and knows how to heal both inside and outside. So as we do this work, we first access that person, and then we have that person do the interviews with the parts. Or if I'm doing couples work or family work or corporate work, we'll have everybody try to access that place and dialogue with each other from that place. So anyway, it's a psychotherapy, still is a psychotherapy, but we're also trying to bring it to other arenas. Because it also is a kind of a different paradigm for understanding the mind that has implications for most everything.
It's interesting. One of the things that comes to mind is the idea that diversity tends to breed really good ideas. And by having a self kind of as the CEO, the leader, and allowing the voices to emerge from each of these parties and hearing them out entirely might create a better end product. Does that resonate? Okay.
Very much. Yeah. And too often, partly because of the way we're raised and because we don't know better, we tend to lock up certain parts. And as I know you're familiar with from your work with men, and we tend to become very dominated by or blended with other parts that run our lives. And so we aren't diverse inside. We've kind of lost that. And so this is a way to open those doors and bring everybody back home.
Brilliant. I'm thinking about two different things. There's a children's book called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon, in which a boy wakes up one morning finding a dragon in his room. His mother says, but there's no such thing as dragons. And over time, you watch this dragon grow. It takes over the house. It literally runs with the house and destroys it. And as soon as the mother acknowledges that the dragon is there, the dragon shrinks. And the conclusion of the book is, I think he just wanted to be noticed.
That's right.
And there are these parts of ourselves that are disgusting to us, and we don't even want to admit they're there. I think of, the great Robert Lopez and his wife who wrote Frozen, and in the words, let it go, they say, conceal, don't feel, don't let it show. And then, of course, she becomes this, horrible ice queen. And the word frozen that you used just now caused me to think of that. Mm-hmm. Last but not least, I'm thinking about the idea that humans so badly need a witness. I'm thinking about one of your colleagues, Dr. Ed Tronick out of Harvard, who did the still face experiment in which we see a mother and her toddler daughter clearly who have a great relationship. And you see what happens when the toddler feels attended to and attuned to and noticed, and what happens when she doesn't. And it seems like your system is a way for us to attend to all of those voices and make sure that they're heard and attuned to.
Yeah, that's a beautiful poetic description of it. And yeah, and the reason they aren't a lot of the time is because we misunderstand what they are. So when you get hurt by a trauma, or when as a child your parent is nasty to you in some way, or you think they are, there are parts of you that get hurt the most, and they tend to be these very sensitive inner childlike parts that are called inner children in other systems. And before they were hurt, they gave you all kinds of creativity and joy and awe at the world, playfulness and intimacy. But after they get hurt, now they feel to you like just a bundle of emotional pain, or a feeling of worthlessness that they carry now, or terror from being traumatized. So they accumulate what I'm going to call burdens of extreme beliefs and emotions that came into you from that experience, and attach to these parts and drive them almost like a virus, like the COVID now.
Sure.
People. And make them extreme. And then we don't want anything to do with them.
Right.
And so we try to get away from them and lock them away in inner basements or caverns or listen, and try to move on. Just ours is a rugged individualist culture.
Right.
Back, just move on.
Move on.
And leave all that in the past. Thinking you're leaving memories, sensations, emotions, and beliefs, when actually you're leaving frozen in these scenes the parts of you that were hurt the most and are the most sensitive. And so those we call exiles.
Mm-hmm.
Most all of us have a lot of exiles. And when you get a lot of exiles, then you feel a lot more fragile and delicate, and the world seems a lot more dangerous. And so other parts have to jump into these protective roles to keep those exiles locked away, and also to manage your life so they don't get triggered. Because if they get triggered, it's a dangerous situation, emergency.
Definitely.
You become flooded with all the emotion that you've pushed away. And that just becomes reinforcing, because when an exile gets triggered and you feel flooded, then you hate that feeling. You hate being this terrified little kid again. And so your protectors work even harder to keep that from ever happening again. And it becomes a vicious cycle, not knowing that it's not just this terror that's taken over. It's this little kid who's terrified. So if I'm working with a client and suddenly they have a panic attack, I don't do the grounding, look into my eyes, feel your feet on the floor, take some deep breaths. I'll say, oh, it's great that this little part is here. So welcome right now. We get he's really scared. We get he's probably stuck in a scary place, and we're going to help him. And part calms down, and the client's grounded again. So it's a very different paradigm.
It's amazing. And with regard to panic and anxiety in general, we know that avoidance is at the heart of it. And the more that we confront it, the better. And the way that you gently confront it is just so brilliant. I'm just thinking about also one of my favorite aphorisms, name it to tame it. And just thinking about the exiles that you mentioned and how we can behave unconsciously, driven by our exiles to do heinous things if we don't get to know these parts. And it seems like that is the byproduct of these unconscious, terrible behaviors, that perhaps we'd be more likely to engage in them if we got to know them with, and we'll talk about the 8 C's later on, but with some curiosity.
Yeah. And there's another class of part I hadn't mentioned yet, which is related to what you just said. So we have these protectors who are trying to manage our lives, control everything, and please everybody, so our exiles don't get triggered. But the world has a way of breaking through those defenses anyway and triggering an exile, at which point it's an emergency, because those flames of emotion are going to consume you. So we have another set of parts, protectors, we call firefighters, who immediately go into action, often in an impulsive way, without any regard to the consequences to your body or relationships, to put out that fire or to get you away from it, or distract you from it till it burns itself out. And often those are the ones that get vilified in the mental health field.
Sure.
And the ones that are the reason our prisons are overflowing.
Right.
Because they don't think about the consequences. All they know is, I've got to get you out of this state right now, regardless. And so then managers try to control them, and that gets to be another big internal polarization.
It's so brilliant. Even the names that you came up with for these parts, I mean, so well thought out, so well constructed, and so easy to relate to. It's no surprise that IFS is beginning to gain, or has not beginning, it says for some time now, been an international phenomenon. Can you just share some of the things, some of the conditions that IFS has been known to treat?
Well, we treat most everything. We have outcome studies for, oddly enough, our first one was with rheumatoid arthritis. And so we do a lot of work with medical symptoms, because when your parts can't get through to you directly, they're going to use your body in some form. So, and then we also have an outcome study with PTSD that was amazingly successful.
Amazingly.
And with depression. But we use IFS with all kinds of syndromes, and even things that are thought to be incurable, like schizophrenia and psychotic processes and so on. And we're bringing it to a lot of different arenas. Like, I'm starting to get involved in helping white people with their racism, for example, because it's a part that carries that legacy burden. That's another kind of burden that you inherit rather than comes from your direct experience.
Beat me to the punch, man. That's definitely one of my questions.
Okay.
Yes, this is great.
Yeah. So it's a different paradigm for understanding human nature and the operation of the mind that is non-pathologizing. It makes things that seem very, very crazy or signs of pathology a lot less so, and empowers people to have a way to actively work with themselves, even when they're not in the therapy office, in a way that's going to change all this, transform it.
Brilliant. I'm thinking about that once again to bring up the great Robert Lopez, the EGOT winner who wrote Frozen. He also wrote a musical called Avenue Q, kind of a Sesame Street for adults. One of the songs in it is "Everyone's a Little Bit Racist," and very few people are willing to acknowledge this just kind of disgusting reality about ourselves. And yet it's there. You use the word anachronistic, and I know that historically it's almost as if IFS is at least partially a byproduct of studying human evolution and what is anachronistic, what used to serve us and what now does not.
Right.
Almost like the artifacts that cause anxiety and depression in many ways, that things that used to be protective now not. But it seems that a big part of the anachronism or the anachronistic approaches that our system seems to try to use to defend itself are attended to. And we don't like what we see, and we undervalue the part that is trying to protect us. We try to quash it, including that racist part. Oh, and I was kind of thinking about even Robert Sapolsky and his finding that there is a dark side to that wonderful cuddle hormone, oxytocin. That it kind of,
about that. Yeah.
It's amazing. And how the dark side is that we feel more of our endogenous oxytocin when we see somebody from our tribe, and we don't have that same hit when we don't. Yeah. And I'm just wondering about the racist parts. How do they show up? What do they sound like? How are they attended to? And does IFS help address our internalized racism?
Yeah, so I just actually am writing a piece on that topic, and actually in 2001 I wrote a piece called the subtitle was Whether to Embrace or Exile Your Inner Bigot, for a journal called Voices, and in it I described what I called racist coalition of three different parts that I was very humbled to find in there. And one of them really was just trying to protect me. I found that if anything threatening came forward, it wasn't afraid to use some kind of racial epithet to dissuade me from going forward with that person. So it was really just also stuck in the past, but it was just a protector, and it would, if white people were threatening, it would say something about them. It was not particularly focused on Black people necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
And then I grew up in Evanston, Illinois, which was very Christian, and I was the only Jew in a pretty tough peership of Christian boys who were very overtly racist and anti-Semitic and homophobic. And I was pretty insecure, and I really wanted to fit in. So the part of me that stuck back in middle school just absorbed a lot of that stuff and got frozen there. So when I found that was the hardest one to acknowledge, because it's the most overtly racist part. And I've done a lot of work with it. And then, let me see, there was another one, which isn't coming to mind at the moment, but the point is there's several points. One is, as you said, you can't grow up in this culture and not carry some racism. It's just in all of us. It's what I call a legacy burden that seeps into everybody. I was reading recently that Desmond Tutu got on an airplane and was very proud to see that there were two Black pilots. And then there was technical trouble on the flight. And he found a part of him saying, "Oh, I wish there was a white pilot." Wow. So even him, you cannot avoid it. So, and it's just very helpful to believe that, because then you don't have the same level of shame about it. And to know that it's just a part of you. It's not all of you. You're not a racist. You've got a part that does spout this stuff. But it's not even evil itself. It's just confused. And so I think the anti-racism movement has been really, really powerful to raise our consciousness and make us have a lot more empathy for us, meaning you and me as white people, have a lot more empathy for what Black people have gone through.
Sure.
And because the approach to your racist thoughts has been confrontive and trying to expel them, can create polarization with these parts who will often get even stronger in the face of trying to be expelled. So that's one of the messages I'm trying to bring, is there's a different way to relate to your inner racist that actually allows it to transform rather than trying to lock it away and exile it.
Absolutely. And I'm guessing this is an international phenomenon. It's not just limited to within our culture. As you've mentioned, even somebody is aware, and somebody from a vastly different culture coming from South Africa has his own internalized racism. And it sounds like it needs a voice in a safe place to kind of almost express itself, almost like going to the dermatologist and having something expressed like a pimple, so that it no longer festers.
Yeah, and it's, as I did with some of my racist parts, until you can actually unload the racism. Like you might turn on the TV and there's a black commentator and you might hear inside, oh, what's this guy going to say?
Mm-hmm.
So I might notice that. And rather than shaming that part or shaming myself for feeling it, as a good parent might to a child who's confused, I might say, okay, I get that you feeling it and you need to protect me that way, but you don't. And that's not right. This person is going to say something important, but in a gentle way, not in a shaming. And then as I notice that, it becomes what I call a trailhead, something I'm going to follow to try and find the part that's saying it and actually work with it until it's healed and it no longer feels the need to protect me that way. So it's just a very different approach. And it's the same approach we use with virtually every, kind of problem. If it's an addiction, rather than feeling ashamed of the part that makes you drink, you go to it with curiosity, you listen to it, how it's trying to protect you. You honor it for its attempts to protect you, and then you learn about what it's protecting, and you go get permission to heal that, and now it doesn't need to drink anymore.
I want to take a bit of a pivot and talk about epigenetics. Epigenetics, simply described, is that we don't just carry the physical traits of our ancestors, but sometimes we carry their emotional or behavioral states. To just illustrate it further, just for the listener who hasn't yet been in touch with this, two groups of rats are exposed to the scent of cherry blossoms. And one of the groups has an aversive sound played during the smelling of cherry blossoms. They come to hate the smell of cherry blossoms, and their offspring, without any prompting, begin to hate it as well. And I'm thinking about how well you address trauma in this lifetime, but I'm wondering if there seems to be, for example, for the offspring of Holocaust survivors or other traumas, does it seem to work with those voices that really are very hard to get in touch with, I imagine, just because they are so deeply embedded?
Yeah, so that is a whole category we call legacy burdens that has become a big part of IFS now. So the burdens I described earlier came into you from personal experience, some kind of trauma or attachment injury. But there's a whole nother class that, as you're saying, is transmitted sometimes through genetics, but other ways from your family lineage or from your ethnic group or just are floating around in our culture that we absorb, like racism.
Sure.
And so everybody's got a bunch of these legacy burdens that also attach to our parts and drive the way they operate. And when we stumble upon one, people often know this didn't come into me from my experience. They know I got this this is my father's energy. This is my mother's, or I know this came from centuries ago, really. And the good news about legacy burdens is that if a part realizes that it didn't happen to them, they're easier to unload because you don't have to. You mentioned witnessing earlier.
Yes.
Feeling witnessed and how healing that is. And a lot of how we heal these exiled parts is to ask them. I would have you, Adam, ask this little boy what it wants you to know about what happened to him and how bad it was back there. And as he gives you the video, gives you the emotions, gives you the sensations, that part is saying, finally, you get this. It's almost like Black people are saying, finally, you guys are waking up. You're getting how bad it's been. And so that witnessing is a big part of healing in general, all levels. And once an exile feels witnessed, then we can actually, I would literally have you, Adam, go into the scene it's stuck in and be with that little boy in the way he needed you at the time. And then bring him to a safe, comfortable place, at which point he'd be willing to unload the feelings and beliefs he got back The good news about legacy burdens is you can bypass a lot of that because it didn't happen to you. It happened to maybe it happened 3 generations earlier, or maybe it happened to your grandparents in the Holocaust, and so you don't necessarily have to witness that. And so parts often are willing to just unload it once they realize it doesn't belong to them.
I'm thinking about intuition. You've mentioned that we have many minds. I love that idea and I agree with it. And it seems to be corroborated by science now that we know that we have neurons in our brain, in our heart, and in our stomach. Not numerically in that order. I believe it's more like brain, stomach, heart. And I'm wondering how intuition, which is actually being put under the microscope, is that showing up in your work too?
Yeah. So intuition, there are a couple of different sources, but you've got me talking about the spirituality of IFS a little bit. So as I come from a very scientific, atheistic family. Father was a very prominent endocrinology researcher, and brothers that do that too. And so I came with that set of assumptions about the world and not at all spiritual, but from hanging around with clients in their inner worlds, at some point I had to start to think differently and couldn't deny various phenomena that were happening. And in my curiosity of exploring them, and one of the things I'm proudest of is that I believed clients in terms of how they were describing their inner worlds.
Yeah.
Rather than coming with a lot of my own presumptions or theoretical things. And so I carried that even when things took me way, way far afield from my paradigm, which includes intuitive hits that people would get, which, as I had them follow, would be coming from things that said they weren't parts, that seemed to be more spiritual entities to them. And so we do run into these, what we now call guides that people seem to have, and do give them pieces of wisdom about something that might be happening in their lives, that doesn't seem to come from their own life experience.
Yeah, it seems to be coming from elsewhere, almost like the concept of better angels or something like that.
Exactly, yeah. So
here you are, a scientist, very skeptical, and you're hearing it time and time again. And as a scientist, when you hear the repetition of something, I'm guessing that also causes a light bulb to go off.
Well, that was it. I mean, if it was just 1 or 2 people, as I seemed to get more open to the possibility, more and more clients were having the experience. I wasn't having the experience myself personally, but these things would show up in other clients, and I got curious, and I would, some sessions I would do long interviews with the guide, and would find it was saying the same things that the guide and some other client who was totally of a different religion or no religion. And then I started to get more serious about the phenomena. I always hesitate to talk too much about it because I don't want IFS to be written off as something.
Right. As something woo-woo.
Yeah.
When it's really, when you have so many numbers behind you.
Yeah. And it's good for people to not discard when they come in, to not just say, oh, that couldn't be. And because they can be very valuable.
So speaking of skepticism, here you are back when you were noticing these ideas emerging within you from a family systems therapeutic perspective, that actually these are all internalized. And I'm guessing at the beginning you faced a lot of resistance on the outside. And I was wondering, what did the external voices sound like? What did your parts sound like? And what gave you the conviction to press on?
That's a good question. So the resistance was all around. So as I said, I was a family therapist at the time. I was sort of rising in the field, kind of promising young theoretician. And family therapy was pendulum swing away from what were thought to be the excesses of individual psychotherapy, particularly psychoanalysis. And so there was a big ethic in family therapy to not work with individuals and to not work with intrapsychic process.
Mm-hmm.
But as I started to get interested, as my clients were talking about their parts, and I got intrigued because it seemed like they had this inner family inside of them that I could study. My colleagues they sort of exiled me in a way. And I would go to conferences and people would walk out. And so that was one side of it. But then the other side was I was in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And I would get up in grand rounds and present to the sea of white lab coats, all the other psychiatrists. And it was very influenced by self-psychology, by Heinz Kohut.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And Kohut had this, what he called fear of fragmenting, was a big part of his work. And so I would be attacked because I was fragmenting people by having them even focus at all on these parts. It's the opposite you're trying to do, trying to have them ignore all that and have them have more integrity, which, my argument was they come in pretty fragmented because all these parts are spread all over. And we're trying to round all these parts up and bring them back home and make them feel more integrated. But I got attacked on that side too.
Mm. What gave you the conviction to press on?
So as I look back on it, it's a couple parts. So as I mentioned, my father was a prominent scientist physician.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was the oldest of 6 boys. So I didn't have a head for science. And so many of my burdens were from his frustration with me because I was supposed to be a physician. As I say, 3 of my brothers are. And so I had these burdens of worthlessness, the sense that I'm not valuable, carried by a bunch of my exiles. And to counter that, I had a part that was really, really wanted to strive to achieve something, to prove that I wasn't worthless. And that part could become quite arrogant and didn't care what people thought, and would just press on because I really had to do this. And so that part, it was a kind of cluster. I mentioned a racist coalition, so there was a coalition of parts that would make me disdain the people who were attacking me and toughen my skin, and then this drive to do something with my life, to prove my father wrong. All of that got me that far, but then I started to become the leader of a community, and those parts started getting in the way in a big way.
They became anachronistic.
Yes, exactly. And I was lucky because I had some people in my community who confronted me about it and said, you got to work with this if we're going to stay with you. And, what I'm proud of is that I listened to them and I actually did a lot of work with that worthlessness so that these other parts could relax a lot. And now, you mentioned earlier how humble I seem, and that's pretty genuine because I've done a lot of work on the parts of me that both needed the accolades constantly and also didn't care about people and didn't care what people thought that much, which isn't the best quality in a therapist. So.
Yeah, and I was, before this recording, Dick and I were talking, and I was recalling having met him in 2016 when he was presenting in front of quite literally hundreds of therapists. And he came into the room. I was at the front table, and he, here I am meeting the great Dr. Richard Schwartz, and he just puts out his hand and says, "Hi, I'm Dick." And it was just kind of, you were so chill and so lovely in your presentation. I just liked you immediately. And it sounds like you really, it was a part of your own evolution. You needed that, that kind of swashbuckling attitude to get you through all of the naysayers, the people walking out. And then over time, you realized, okay, this will not continue to serve me. And you were willing to let go. And I imagine that was scary to let go.
It was scary, and those parts that I mentioned before were really good at polarizing. So they would try to find the faults in other people's theories and emphasize those.
Right.
How much better IFS was. And so
almost a Schadenfreude. Like, I'm going to take so much pleasure in watching them just get destroyed.
Right. So it was scary to give all that up and to be more humble, both about myself, but also about IFS, and to try to promote it more through my presence and through showing the positive side of it than trying to convince everybody that it's the best ever.
Wonderful. And I've got to ask this question, and we can scrap it if you don't like it. But I am the son of a Richard, and he, I've rarely seen somebody go by the name Dick, and I think it's a very confident call on your part to say, "Hello, I'm Dick." Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, my mother claims she didn't know what it meant when she named me that, which is still hard to believe. But it was, especially going through adolescence, it was merciless. Oh my
gosh, you were an adolescent with that name.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was brutal. And I had friends who approached adolescents named Dick and changed their name to Rick really quick.
Exactly.
And I don't know why I didn't try that, but there's some part of me that was just, okay, fuck you. I'm
moving forward with this.
Keep the Dick. Yeah.
And that was the same energy that allowed you, I'm guessing, to press on.
I think it was probably the same part. Yeah.
Right. I'm gonna show you. I'll show you. And today, I'm guessing it doesn't have that same charge. It's just, yeah. What's your relationship with your name now?
Yeah, I mean it's fine now, and although I'll often be in company with others, and they'll say something, "Quit being such a dick." And I was like, watch your language.
You've mentioned, and I'm going to pivot to mindfulness because it relates to, of course, your willingness to kind of evolve past that energy. You've had the pleasure of spending time with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. Clearly, mindfulness is an integral part of IFS. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so I like to think of this as mindfulness plus, because the first steps aren't that different, which involve separating from your thoughts and emotions and then noticing them with a kind of accepting attitude. And in doing that, you're accessing more self, just because your parts unblend, and then there is this other person there suddenly. And that's a great first step. The critique I have of mindfulness, it isn't really a critique, because that meditation by itself can be very, very valuable, just, in terms of calming your life and accessing more self, bringing it more to your life. But it isn't necessarily compassion to watch suffering beings parade by. So if you think of these as just ephemeral thoughts and emotions, which is what a lot of the Buddhist tradition has thought of them as, where mindfulness comes from, then it makes sense to just observe them, to just be separate and notice them, but don't engage. If instead you think of them as suffering beings that deserve and need something from you, then you're going to want to get to know them. And so that's the next steps that IFS starts to take. So if you were practicing mindfulness and you notice there's a part of you that is critical of you, just to pick on the critic today.
Mm-hmm. Why not?
Right. Rather than just notice it, I would have you ask it some questions about why it does that and learn what it's afraid would happen if it didn't call you names all day, and find out what it protects and see if we can get it out of that role. So, yeah, this is mindfulness plus. And just having said that, many people practice IFS on themselves, by themselves, as a kind of meditation practice, but then also practice mindfulness because it is a nice complement. But meditation in general and mindfulness per se doesn't necessarily heal. It's good practice,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't necessarily heal.
Right.
And it can be used, and I just am writing a book on this, partly on this. It can be used as a spiritual bypass. So,
Can you explain what spiritual bypass is? That's an important concept.
yeah, so it's a term that was coined by John, I'm forgetting his name right now,
Mm-hmm.
many years ago.
It's not Kabat-Zinn.
No. Anyway, but it refers to when you use a meditation practice to get away from what I'm calling your exile.
Right.
And many people come to meditation to try and deal with their emotions.
Right.
Emotions feel undealable.
Sure.
And these practices can get you higher than those flames, just like drugs can get you higher than the flames, or
Any of the firemen.
Any of those firefighters.
Firefighters, excuse me, yes.
Okay.
Non-gender.
As you do the meditation and you feel the relief, which is, I'm a child of the 60s, and so I came out of college and learned TM and did it as a firefighter activity. It really helped. It really helped me. And at the same time, I was further exiling certain parts of me that way. And then you get addicted to the practice because, when you're not meditating, those exiles are going to try harder to come after you.
So essentially, mindfulness is very good. It's not complete.
That's right.
Needs to be done in conjunction with something else that attends to those parts. Otherwise, they are merely bypassed, and this just becomes another way of not acknowledging, witnessing those parts that need our attention.
And there are Buddhist leaders like Jack Kornfeld and Thich Nhat Hanh and Pema Chodron who would agree with that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are others like His Holiness who see there are these destructive emotions and there are constructive emotions. And you want to build up the muscle of the constructive ones so that you don't have so much of the destructive ones. So it's really the opposite of this approach.
Got it. And IFS is it's easy to understand, and yet it's so sophisticated. I love the 8 C's. I know that we could probably spend an entire hour talking about them, but I was wondering if you could just very briefly attend to what those are.
Yeah. So as I was seeing the self pop up in different people, just by getting parts to step back and relax, and it was almost like the same person would emerge suddenly and would know how to begin the healing process. At some point, I decided to catalog the qualities that seemed to emerge. And oddly enough, they all began with the letter C. So the foundational quality that would come up, like if I were working with you, Adam, and I had you focus on your critic, since we're picking on it, and I'd say, how do you feel toward it? You'd say, I hate it.
Exactly.
Ask the one who hates it to step back. How do you feel toward it now? Frequently, people say, I'm just kind of curious about why it calls me names. Seconds earlier, they hated it or were terrified of it. Suddenly, they're calm, confident relative to it, and curious about it. And even many people will often spontaneously say, and I feel kind of sorry for it. I feel compassion for it, that it has to do this inside of me. So those are half of the 8Cs. And then as we would go along, they would have more clarity in terms of its role, and also its image would change. It might initially look like a monster, and now it looks like a teenage kid who's got too much responsibility. And they would show a lot more creativity in how they related to it. And they would have the courage to go into these inner caves and abysses that they were terrified of going into earlier. And then they would also feel more connected to it, or they would desire to connect to it. So connectedness was another of the 8Cs, and I think I covered them all just now.
Wonderful.
So, and there are other qualities that characterize self. We didn't include, partly because they don't begin with the letter C, but also these are the ones seem to be most relevant to the healing process. But qualities like joy and perspective and forgiveness and things like that as well.
Very similar to the internationally collected virtues based on the work of Seligman and Peterson, if you're familiar with those 24. Yeah, that's really cool. And if anybody's interested in those, they are called Values in Action, VIA.org, I believe is how you work, VIAcharacter.org. Oh my gosh, I love this. I've often thought about your model as almost being similar to if the Senate were working very well or Congress were working very well, these various voices and ideally a noble leader kind of harnessing the voices of all of these things. And that or if you could imagine all the cells in our body, how they seem to get happier when we represent them well. We have less back pain when we're congruent. Does that resonate as consistent with your model?
Yeah, very much. And there are exercises where you would have like a board table and bring all your parts to the table, and you are you're at the head of the board maybe, or the kitchen table if you want a different analogy. Some like kind of healing circle where they're all there, or at least the ones most interested in whatever particular issue you're facing. And you would put out as the self some kind of question to the group about what direction you want to go in your life. And then you would hear from all the different parts. And you, again, as the good leader, the good mediator, would listen and take seriously different positions and start to do some mediation maybe, and then come up with a vision for how you want to go forward that everybody can buy into. And then as you go forward and you hear from parts that say, I don't really want to do that, you go to them and say, but remember, we all agreed that we're going to, like you would with a bunch of kids. So there's a lot of parallels. And as we bring it more into the corporate world, and leadership is such a big, important piece of that work, the idea of a self-led corporate leader becomes more and more important, and do that kind of leadership.
And when the self is representing all of its employees, so to speak, very well, the employees rejoice.
If you listen to.
If you listen to and appreciated.
Quality of curiosity.
Wonderful. I guess my last question would be this, Dick, if you could confer somehow magically, fantastically, the ability to attend to various parts for all humanity, if all humanity possessed the skills that IFS proposes, what do you imagine would happen globally? And what would you imagine would happen individually?
It's funny you should ask, because that is something I've been writing about in this book I'm doing for Sounds True. And also, I'll recommend a book by a guy, I don't know if you know the name, Rutger Bregman.
Familiar.
He wrote a book. First book was called, not the first, but the bestseller was called Utopia. And his most recent book just came out called Humankind, where he takes on the idea of that humanity, that human nature is really base and bad, that gets covered over and civilized by civilization, and goes through history and shows how wrong that is, how much evidence there is to the contrary, but how much most all of our institutions are based on that, and how different institutions would be if they believed the opposite. And I'm bringing the opposite. I'm bringing a lot of evidence that the opposite is true, and ways to achieve that very different view of human nature. And, we have small kind of initiatives around how it can be done in schools, for example, and other places, corporations now. But he gives a lot of examples from different places in the world where they've tried, instead of having a prison system, they would have a very different way of treating people when they commit crimes. Or, what a fiasco the war on drugs is, just an externalization of the war we go to against the part of us that likes drugs, and how damaging that is at both levels. So if this could be, my vision is to bring this as a new view of human nature to the culture. It does change everything. It changes how we relate to each other, how we relate to all kinds of psychiatric problems, but also all kinds of cultural problems.
Yeah, I imagine we'd be a lot less defended. And if we owned our parts, a lot more conscious, a lot more compassionate with ourselves and with others.
Yeah, and it's a lot easier to own something if you know it's just a little
totally
part of you who's saying these racist things.
This doesn't define me, and I will get to know it, and I will not let it dictate my behavior.
I'll help it change. I'll help it transform.
Yeah, I'll help it transform. It's almost as, I guess I was wrong. Can you describe a time that you saw somebody transform a horrible part, perhaps a racist part, in a really, really non-spiritual bypassing, truly accurate, attuned, authentic way?
Yeah. As I've been writing this paper, I've been doing this with groups of white people where they go and find their racist parts. And one example I give is a guy who takes him a long time to find it. It's sort of like a snake, it seems like at first.
Right. Serpentine.
Yeah, exactly. And he finally does find it. And it shows him himself as a teenage kid. Trying to remember the whole situation. Oh, and he was in middle school. He was kind of nerd and overweight and had been bullied a lot, and took on racist beliefs mainly to say, I'm not as bad as those people,
right,
to boost himself up. And this kid was just stuck back in that scene. And so when we get him out, and he feels much better, and he feels connected to the guy's name is Andy's self, that he's very willing to unload the racism. He doesn't need it anymore.
Right. It clearly doesn't serve.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so grateful to you. I'm going to close with an idea that came from Ilan Kundera. He was asked once, when he had written the book, The Unbearable Lightness of Being, he was asked, to which character do you most relate? With whom do you identify? And he said, they are all me. And
Beautiful.
And I think that's just so in line with what you're all about. And I just want to thank you so much for all the healing that you bring to the world. I will mention just before we go that you're doing work to try to create a peace between fraction groups, even in Israel and in places like that. I just think you're amazing, Dick.
Thank you, Adam. This has been delightful. Really good to get to know you.
Likewise. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.